Hey everybody, welcome back for another edition of Late Night Snacks. I'm here, your host, Emilio Villarreal, Director of Marketing at OrderEZ, joined as always by Jeff Meese, our founder and CEO, aka the Capitan. And we have a new individual here on board to join us for Late Night Snacks. Jeff, would you like to go ahead and introduce him?
Yeah, we are very excited to welcome Mark Epstein to the team as the head of hospitality. He'll be doing some business development as well, but I think kind of at the core of his role is going to be looking after all of our fine and lovely users.
Excited to be here.
Welcome, welcome. And I think with that, it's a perfect opportunity to get started with introducing our drinks, because I think that deserves a cheers. How about that?
It does. It's our first virtual drink too, which is hard to believe.
This is our first? Huh. Cheers.
Cheers to that.
To the first, not the last.
Indeed.
And oh boy, that is, I need to be careful with that. Because I know how much alcohol I put in it, and I also know just how just sweet and not dangerous it tastes.
It's masking itself.
Goodness. So to kind of kick things off, and then before we jump into the drinks and into a little bit more detail, Mark, do you want to maybe get started by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So let's kind of start from the beginning. Where did I come across F&B in my life? How did I make my way here? Early, kind of in high school, that's when I really found myself in a first kind of waiter role at a diner. And at this point, I was a picky eater. I didn't love food. It was just kind of the job that came to me when I was a junior in high school. I was at the diner Saturday, Sunday mornings, kind of like the same crowd in this town in New Jersey. And that was like my first foray into kind of the world of F&B, being at front of house in a restaurant. And the rabbit hole wouldn't kind of open until I read Kitchen Confidential years later and kind of understood the full scope of everything that can happen in this realm. And a little bit after that, I worked also with a coffee shop that was connected with like a gym, kind of very low quality coffee shop. I hope they're not watching this podcast, but it wasn't a real dive into what like a coffee cafe environment should be. But it did give me kind of like that baseline experience there. And I'd say the biggest element of my F&B experience came in through a hobby of mine, which was photography, which I kind of picked up somewhere in my college years. And then that merged with travel, because you're not going to go on a trip and not take your camera if you're a hobbyist photographer. And I really found myself kind of exploring through the lens of food. If I wanted to learn about a place, food and meals were kind of like the perfect vehicle for that. It was how I was able to get behind a table with individuals, learn their stories, learn why I was traveling to a certain place, kind of what encompassed it. And from there, it's just always been kind of a staple in my life, where a lot of how I spend my time is actually centered around just like the different hobbies and elements within the F&B world. From a professional side of things, I spent most of my time in New York City actually working in the commercial real estate industry. From an account management perspective, working with a lot of restaurant groups. I can say I've been to this is embarrassing, I've been inside more than 300 Red Lobsters in my life, probably. Yeah. A lot of those Cheddar Bay biscuits have been consumed.
Those biscuits are good.
That was a 4-year project, which required a lot of site visits. And we worked with a lot of like restaurant franchisees, operators, kind of got a really good scope at the financial side of things from an operator's perspective, a franchisee's perspective, but dealt in the account management capacity there. And then I made my way over to this side of the world, shortly kind of within the time frame of the start of the pandemic. And I worked in the data industry for a bit from a business development side of things. And now here I am based in Bali with OrderEZ.
Look at that. Taiwan, Bali, Singapore, we're all over. OrderEZ Global.
I did not know that Red Lobster story, but I love it.
I don't.
it, it seems like one of those great facts that you can put about yourself in like an icebreaker game is and just say like you have to guess who's the person. If I walked into a room and they're like, yeah, one of these people has been to 300 Red Lobsters, I wouldn't peg you as the type.
Yeah, it was never kind of in the job description when I took that job. I came on as a commercial real estate associate, a lot of like utilizing my finance degree. Did not think I would be in that many, and it wasn't like in New York this was like rural America. This was St. Louis, Oklahoma, like the outskirts of California. So that was an interesting way to kind of see the country. Yeah, a lot of days in and kind of like those off the turnpike motels because that's where a lot of these sites are located.
Yeah, I just imagine, kind of because as I've been discussing with Mark, I recently went through my first reading of Kitchen Confidential, and I'm just imagining like Mark's crack at the same thing, talking about his exploring, America through the lens of Red Lobster.
That's not story worthy. I have some fun ones from Mexico City, not so much from like Cahokia, Illinois.
So with that, and I'm kind of curious because you're, ended up in Bali, similar to all of us. We kind of started out in America, ended up in Asia. What was it, kind of going back to your whole like food became intertwined with travel? Where's your favorite food travel destination? Not, let's say it can have the worst tourist attractions, terrible hotels, but like you go there because, hey, I'm going to thoroughly enjoy myself from a culinary perspective.
Mexico City.
As a Mexican, can't disagree.
It's one of those places where I went for like a 4-day weekend for a Memorial Day long weekend, and I didn't book flights until I had my restaurant reservations kind of confirmed.
Good man.
And I know that I am not the only person that operates with Mexico City that way. People line those things up and then they book those flights after the fact because it's blown up in like recent times with kind of like the remote work revolution, and a lot of people now have the ability to kind of base themselves out of other places. Like Medellin got like a big digital nomad boost, but being right there with the U.S., these places have kind of become like hubs. And Mexico City, I've seen in a couple of interviews with whether VCs or tech entrepreneurs, they're saying it's going to be a really big hub for some future talent. With that flows a bunch of new creative people, just kind of like different subsets that haven't existed in that city. And I think creativity spurs. It's historically been a very, very artistic city that's featured kind of like all the different regions of Mexico combined in this one capital. And you get a taste of all that. You get a taste of some of the way Mexican cuisine can kind of be combined with like fusion elements. Like I remember the first time I was in Vegas, I'm like, Mexican Chinese fusion, question mark face. But then I tried it. I'm like, this is an awesome combo. I forget the name of the place. It's in the Cosmo. But you really see that kind of showcased in Mexico City. I remember being in a Ukrainian restaurant in Mexico, and it was like Ukrainian pilmeni with kind of like a salsa verde dip. And I'm like, wow.
Sounds weird, but it works.
Fusion.
Yeah, I'm on one hand I'm confused, and that, full disclosure, that may just be the like my Mexican heritage balking at the idea of strange fusion cuisine. But I'm also in this month's Breaking Bread writing about how I initially balked at something that turned out to be incredible. So I'm going to go with you on this one. I would definitely give it a shot.
And I think my example is kind of the minority. The majority of what you're getting is just like al pastor street tacos and just different back alley mezcal bars. They stick to their roots, and they do it well. I remember we were like on a walking tour of the historic district, and the guide pointed out. She was like, "You know how you can tell the best al pastor taco? Look at the spit. They have like an ungodly amount of meat on it. They're working through that through the day. They're going to be popular." And that's how you can kind of gauge the best al pastor tacos. And I don't know. I have a big love affinity for Mexico City, and it's just such a big city that you can't finish exploring it, which is kind of why I'm like, I'd love to live there for 2 years. And I've talked to people that have lived there for 2 years, and they're like, yeah, that's not enough if you want to eat your way through it.
But even the El Pastor, isn't that fusion in its own right? I mean, you're taking kind of classic Turkish or Middle Eastern style kebab, throwing the pork on the spit and turning it into Al Pastor. Like, at its roots, I think there's a certain aspect of that that's kind of, any city where you have that kind of cultural melting pot. And it sounds like Mexico is going to only add to that in the coming years. I think that like such great things happen when you get, all of these things smashing together in a city, and like, the food, the creativity, the businesses that are started, and just the quality of life is really, is upped by just that diversity of vantage points and viewpoints.
It's funny, and I hope it's not too American to say, because my initial thought was when you said, well, isn't it also fusion? And I'm like, well, if it's old enough, I think we kind of forget the foreignness of it. And I think as Americans, we can all sort of attest to seeing this phenomenon in action. But yeah, I've been around, we've all been around. Like, my favorite places are the ones where you get a bunch of different, influences, and you get funky spices and all kinds of different, people are learning from each other and trying to one up each other with different profiles and whatnot. Like, it's fun. I'd say Singapore probably is in a lot of ways a place like that, where it's like very much a foodie city of people trying to outfood each other.
The correlation between great food and the attraction of young people is almost 100%. Like, for small and growing cities to be successful, and Singapore's not small any longer, but 20 years ago or even 15 years ago when I first came here, it was still a little kind of sleepy. You had fine dining, but and you had great kind of local regional cuisine, but there was almost nothing in the middle of that. And over the course of the last 15 years, as the city has become more international, and you have like a broader and deeper melting pot of people, like, it's filled in all of those little gaps with food from every corner of the world. And I think it's such a richer place now for it. Yeah, and it's one of those things that countries have to embrace on some level if they want to continue to be successful, because the people who are attracted to that are the same people who are starting companies who are successful and bringing things and creating jobs that countries want and stuff like that.
1,000%.
And I think that's like an element that Mexico City never really saw until Pujol kind of hit the world's best list. There was like this big stigma with Mexican cuisine and fine dining, where you'd look at French cuisine, Italian cuisine. This all came from kind of the roots of like these regional hubs and villages in the countries, and made its way to fine dining. And for so long that didn't exist within Mexican cuisine until Pujol came and was like, oh, hey, now you're the number 11 restaurant in the world. And everyone's like, a Mexican restaurant? Wow. And that really broke that barrier to allow that kind of like middle ground to not fine dining, but to work its way up to some of the more like unique higher end offerings, which didn't exist for so long. And now they're springing up all over Mexico City, and they are great. They're, I think, redefining kind of what the F&B space is there as a whole. And it's just becoming a very like regional hub as a foodie city, even more.
I think you hit on the phenomenon well, in that, in thinking of it, it's not as simple as just having a restaurant do the best food of a certain type, because the audience might not appreciate it. If the people don't really have a desire for, let's say Alinea opened up in Scranton, like, I don't know if their first years would have been a success, because it's different being located in Chicago, where it's just a bustling city, and again, as Jeff mentioned, more young people looking for that new thing. I think that it's kind of interesting how you think that, like, as people make little leaps of innovation, and the audience take little leaps of trying out new stuff, eventually they meet in the middle until it forms a perfect bridge of like, okay, now as you're more familiar with the cuisine, as you're familiar with like, the strata of what it can and can't do, now we're going to explore the full strata of what it can and can't do, and then present it out to the audience to choose from.
Yeah,
as much as I could go in a full dissertation about the journeys and joy of Mexican food, I did want to go into a bit more about the hospitality side because, previously it's something that we had discussed in the customer success sort of vocabulary and language. But I was curious in terms of, how this shift, how you felt about sort of the shift in language and terminology, but more so uh, how you felt it spoke to you and your own approach to what it is that you do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think anything involved in the F&B space, whether it's a fine dining restaurant, like a taco street food stand, to a tech company, a big element of it is like the storytelling. It's like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And that kind of relates a lot to like branding. You see some of these restaurants have incredible brands kind of behind the kitchen, behind the service and the hospitality. And the brand should speak to the hospitality in that setting to tell that story, to kind of help people navigate what it is the product is, whether it's uh, a bowl, a carnitas bowl, or a fine dining meal, or a software tool for the F&B space. And hospitality just needs to embody kind of that story and that brand and provide, for me, hospitality would be just like a genuine, warm, friendly, and generous approach to whether it's solving a problem or providing a service. And I think the fusion of that element of hospitality and the storytelling that comes from anything across the F&B space is kind of what it means for me. And to bring that element into kind of like day-to-day roles, whether it's understanding that customers know, why are we working at OrderEZ? What is our experience on this side of the table, and how does it relate to their side of the table? And that can be told through a brand, that can be told through a story and a narrative in a very genuine and honest way to better my experience helping them or their experience from the get-go. And that's kind of like the ethos that I've really wanted to bring into my role and to kind of translate through kind of this brand redesign, bringing this hospitality kind of curtain and kind of swinging it open. And yeah, that's, I think, a great direction to go through, especially the space we're in.
I think you touched on it well in sort of mentioning like how when they come across us and how to tell a brand story. But I think that a lot of people often, when we think about branding, we're very quick to go negative. We're very quick to like even me as a marketer, if I hear about someone who's like focuses on branding, generally my first thought's like, okay, it's some fluffy stuff designed to sell a fake image, and I just kind of cringe at the idea of it. But kind of going into like what it is that we do and more specifically who it is that we are. I mean, we've all worked in kitchens or restaurants or bars or cafes or in some aspect of the F&B space, and I think that it's important that they know like, hey, we're carrying that same energy, into this next endeavor. And we get it. We understand what it is that you try and do and what embodies the backbone of your service and embodies ours too.
Yeah. And that branding element, it's like, okay, what's the marketing ploy? That's when you hear like these buzzwords, branding. But I feel like storytelling is genuine. Like you sit down and when you read a book and you're lost in that story and it's just like, you have like that vision in your head, that picture. It's like, if we, not to build a brand, but if we can convey that story properly through the lens of hospitality, I feel like we won't need this marketing ploy branding. It's just kind of be an embodiment of what we do through the story of the problems we're trying to fix, the service we're trying to offer, and where we've been in their shoes, kind of all bundled into one beautiful package of software.
Elegant, beautiful. We could keep on with the compliments. I think Jeff would approve of that.
Absolutely.
And I think it's something which, like, as you mentioned with storytelling and kind of it being more pure form, like it does sort of two things. One, in the sense of it lets people know who we are, but I think also it's important for us to let ourselves know who we want to be, and that it's good to have a stake in the ground to say, hey, we don't want to stray away from this. We want to make sure that through what we do, we're continuing to embody this and continuing to reflect this. So,
yeah, and
Jeff?
it's easy. It's easy after you've been doing something for a while to forget where it all started. But the starting point was really just trying to make everything work a little bit smoother for everybody involved. It's an industry that has historically been overworked. So long hours were the norm. Bad communication, trust, and hope were kind of the main strategies. And kind of if we can bring that all together and just give people a little bit more certainty, give them confidence that things are going to work the way that they think they're going to work, and then save them some time. Like I think about everybody that I know who's worked in F&B in frontline or back of house positions for years, like saving a couple hours a week just means you get to have just that little bit more of a normal life because, well, you've been reading Kitchen Confidential and Mark mentioned it earlier, but there is a certain aspect of it that is, when you embark on a career in F&B, it's like, it's not just a job. It's like you're choosing a lifestyle, and, helping bring some balance to that is probably appreciated after a while, after you get past the honeymoon stage of, 60-hour weeks plus, 80-hour weeks plus going out with the team after work, whatever the case may be.
It's funny. It does. You mentioned the honeymoon stage, and it does sound really attractive to the point where in reading it, I kind of made me miss my line cook days in a way. Up until kind of I sat the book down and I was like, man, that work was really brutal. Like, I don't know if I want to go back to that at all. Goodness. So to switch gears a bit, Jeff, I see that you've taken a sip out of your cocktail, and I think we all have drinks on deck. Who wants to go first introducing what they're sipping on?
I think I probably have the simplest of the drinks, so I will start with that. March 20th was World Vermouth Day, and one of our new suppliers here in Singapore has this beautiful umami vermouth. So I did a vermouth and soda, classic kind of after work, kind of springtime drink in Italy, and simple, shot of vermouth, top it with soda water, a little bit of lime to garnish, and you're off and running. In fact, I should get the bottle because it is a really unique vermouth. And I'm sure that this is not great television, but Baldoria dry umami vermouth. And I tasted it on last Saturday afternoon, and immediately was like, okay, I have to take one of those. And I've been playing around with it with different stuff. Did a couple of gin martinis with it, dry, wet. There's this gin that I love called the Mass, which is actually kind of umami of its own right. And I did a 50-50 gin and 50-50 gin vermouth martini, and it was actually too umami. I was like, oh my god, this is actually too much of this, and just it didn't work. But then I did a aviation and Baldoria, and it was much nicer, just more balanced, but yeah, vermouth and soda to start the night.
That sounds pretty interesting. I can't say I've personally heard of umami flavor being too prominent in alcohol, but
I'm trying to picture the taste.
It was a real sipper. It was definitely because the gin is has this cremini mushroom umaminess to it. The vermouth, different. I don't know if I can describe it in words yet. I've drank more of the gin than I have of the vermouth, so I've kind of pegged it in my flavor map in my head. But yeah, it really stood out. It really stood out.
Interesting. That's one I'll have to try out. Mark, how about you?
I think I'm going to be the middle of the pack in simplicity, but so there was a new gin that's being distilled here in Bali called East Indies Archipelago Gin. It's one of those gins that brand new, kind of just tried it for the first time this last weekend. And I'm like, I think they started distilling at the beginning of this year. It kind of features like some of the botanicals that are found throughout Indonesia. I'm actually going to get the bottle because Emilio, you did mention you are a sucker for gin packaging.
It's a nice bottle.
Is it?
Emilio's got the sneak peek.
I have to restrain myself, otherwise I'd have that's.
Oh, I like it.
So it's a fun one, and I think they described it as. I speak Indonesian and I do not know this word, but it's a torch ginger flower, which adds bright citrus notes, overlaid by warm Andalaman Batak pepper for a beautifully balanced exotic distilled gin. So yeah, support local, kind of taste some of the botanicals. Indonesia is a huge set of islands. There's an endless list of botanicals that don't even exist as English words. And I think it's cool that they're kind of trying it like this. It's with just a simple gin and tonic with a splash of Italian lemon soda, some crushed black pepper, some thyme, and lemon. So added a couple elements there, but
Right on. Well, I fear that my drink is at some point somewhat deconstituted through the drinking process. So as we can say, it's a recipe in the works still, but still really delicious. So this is based off of a drink I was taught in Seoul on the second story of a convenience store where a buddy and mine were drinking. There was, for some reason, a convenience store which is home to many of my stories, but that had a second story where you could drink and had complete with like DJ table, punching bag, and seats.
I'm picturing it as you're telling me.
It sounds like a kind of 16-year-old clubhouse.
To me, it's still the best thing ever.
Yeah.
So that just speaks to my mental state. But no, really, really interesting spot. But while there, a buddy of mine who had spent much more time in Korea than I had kind of told me what he referred to as sort of a passing down of a generational recipe that he learned from expats before him, that had learned from expats before him. And it was soju, milkus, and Fanta orange, equal parts, to create an orange creamsicle cocktail. Milkus, for the unfamiliar, is basically like a cream soda type soda. Milk is in the name. You get the idea. So I decided to take a crack at that using Calpis flavored yogurt, or flavored Calpis yogurt flavored soju rather. And this is actually my favorite brand. They don't have it on here. They have the sub branding Sunari, but the brand name Chomcharam, which means like the first time, and their original basic flavor is my number one. To that, I added a little orange liqueur, which having some fun with. Give you a closer look if you're curious.
Okay.
And after that, just a little bit of orange bitters and condensed milk, as well as Perrier, just to try and recreate the bubbles that we got from the original version. So taste-wise, spot-on recreation. Texture-wise, still a little bit of a work in progress, but ultimately quite happy with it. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love trying to recreate things. You know, when you just, you're, I don't know, your memories come flooding back and you're like, I really want that thing, whether it's a recipe from a restaurant, a drink from a bar, something like that. And you're like, and you just, it gets, I don't know, at least for me, it like digs its way into my brain and it's like, okay, I got to make this work. I really want this. And there's no other way to get it except for to recreate it from my memory and try to, with the ingredients that I have available to me. And I just think it's so much fun. Sometimes it's glorious. Sometimes it's disastrous. Probably equal parts in my experience.
I would say the results are.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
No, like, do you think it's recreating that original thing you had, or recreating kind of like an emotion or something that it made you feel? Like, what's the overarching goal in that kind of desire to? Is it to feel that again, or is it to like taste that
Well,
again?
it's funny because at least with this drink in particular, I'm not actually trying to recreate the drink. Uh, what I'm trying to do is to recreate the ice cream. uh, because it's really the drink was supposed to mimic an original flavor of orange creamsicle ice cream, and so as I'm drinking it, I'm trying to get as close as I can to that note of that childhood ice cream that I love so much. So it's a weird kind of like trip down memory lane where I'm going through the progression of now currently trying to reach back to a middle point in my life to find out how to represent or recreate this recipe to then represent or resurrect a flavor that I haven't had since I was a kid.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, and I went back to Korea not too long ago, with the October actually, when it was dealing with some paperwork for living out here in Taiwan. I kind of went into it in the blog about how my journey here was less than typical, we'll say. Um, but it was just really cool being back and kind of like seeing all of the places, my old stomping grounds, but strangely through a lens of like I'm back, but I'm also in a ghost town because everyone's isolating. Everyone's like, there's no wild, bustling, super busy city that I was used to. I came out of a quarantine hotel, and I'm like, where'd everybody go? But yes, lots and lots of fun drinking memories in Korea. And actually, I thought that I would help introduce to you and hopefully to the viewership a little bit about how to open a soju bottle. So there's a little bit of there's a little bit of tradition to it. So the idea is that previously these kind of mechanics and little tricks weren't necessary, but due to the modernization of the soju kind of distillation technique, now they have to use it in all sorts of chemicals and preservatives, and thus you have to do things to the soju in order to preserve the flavor. I'm explaining this as it was conveyed to me, so we may come across some potentially logical pitfalls. I
Just
choose not to
accept them.
engage. So step one, you have to kind of, and I don't really know what the purpose of this is, but you kind of have to like camper the bottle. So you're supposed to hit it with your elbow just to kind of get it going. And as you see here, it starts to bring everything up from the bottom to the top. You're getting the bubbling. And then it starts to get really interesting. So I think I have to do this in one fluid motion, so I'll have to repeat steps.
Little tornado.
The Soju Tornado was just considered one of the ways, the idea being that it takes everything and fully blends it up so that you're not getting the chemical taste of the alcohol. None of this. Or the alternate approach, once you open it, and I say alternate because I don't actually know if it's an alternate approach. I've seen them mixed, but it only makes sense to me if you do one or the other, is before pouring it.
Poke it in the eyes.
I was joking. I've seen this done hundreds and hundreds of times. And there you go. Now you've gotten the initial soju layer out that has all the preservatives and bad stuff, leaving you with a nice bottle of soju that, honestly, if you're not familiar with soju, you can just drink it out the bottle. It's like a soft drink. Honestly, it's when I was drinking with my friends, we called soju adult Capri Sun. I'll say the sunari line, the flavored sojus at least. And then you're left with a bottle cap and little twisty thing, which takes play in a lot of Korean drinking games. So one of them, to get ready, you bend this until it's basically a little stick. And this is something that's generally good for groups. So what you do is you pass it around one by one, flick it. When someone eventually flicks it off, they have to drink. Or depending on the rules, they can decide who drinks. So it can get pretty interesting. And another one that maybe more people don't know about is, I don't know if it'll show up here. Can you see that number 15 in there?
No.
No.
I'm trying now.
Shows up on my camera. Well, regardless, I know it doesn't make for great radio for having people trying to stare at a cap, but there's a number on the inside of every single cap. And it's a different number. And so you can do a number guessing game where the person closest to the number, either A has to drink or B gets to pick who drinks. So lots of fun stuff with that, not to mention a myriad of other Korean drinking games of which I've only experienced a fraction, and still I've played dozens and dozens. But yeah, there are people that love their alcohol. I like it.
So I have to interject a little bit more backstory about myself. I grew up in the second most populous Korean population in America outside of Koreatown, Los Angeles, in Bergen County, New Jersey. My high school graduating class was 300 people. Probably 150 were of Korean descent. So I was just littered with beautiful Korean food options my whole life, basically most of my life. From childhood, I got access to all those little Korean snacks like the poke sticks and busha busha, and that's a lot of sodium that I do not regret at all. But I have never seen anyone open a soju that way with living in a town that has like 30 Korean bars, and I'm really interested in this.
What I can say is I learned Korean drinking culture straight from the tap, so to speak. And I will say that, yeah, there's a lot to it. I mean, even so I worked in a Korean company for some time, which means there's an additional layer of Korean work drinking culture. So that's even different. One, you still have to know the games, because during company dinners, you're still going to be expected to play. At one point, I worked at a gaming company in Korea, and I had accrued the nickname Soju Tanker for my ability to handle soju at the company dinners. Despite one old boss leaning in and saying, "Don't try and go shot for shot with the CEO. He's a monster. You won't make it." But yeah, there's different things to take into account. So say, for example, at the time, I was the youngest in my company. So when out with, to dinners and stuff like that with the leadership team, it's always on me. I expected to pour all the drinks, and then I have to wait last for my drink to get poured by one of the elders, or I'd never drink soju out of a bottle like this, as at a company dinner, but you'd always be expected to drink away. So the directions kind of depend on who is sitting around you and their age. So let's say, for example, in this case, I would just go and turn to the side to drink, as opposed to drinking directly in front of you, because I guess it's maybe seen as a bit brazen, or kind of something you do with kind of your friends, as opposed to when there's a societal level between. Tons of stuff like that. You never pour your own drink. It's always poured for you by someone else. Very big fan of that tradition. It kind of adds to the ceremony of it, which makes it a little bit more fun. It's not just sipping some soju with the boys. You kind of there's a little decorum to it, which I appreciate. But yes,
I like those intricacies, though. They really kind of showcase some elements of the culture, whether it's elements of respect. I know with taking a shot, it's gombe.
Gombe, yeah.
I think. Yeah, so it's you cheers the table and then go up, and it's for the people on the ground here and those that have passed on. And it really just kind of shows just like that culture of respect that's so like ingrained in Korean culture. And I learned a new bottle opening technique today too. So
it's messy, but hey, I think it's worth the theater. And I assure you, if you do that around any like Koreans straight from Korea, you're gonna be their favorite. They're like, who taught you this? But no, it's really been awesome kind of hearing your thoughts on hospitality, and thank you for joining in, Mark. Really appreciate you kind of taking this opportunity to introduce yourself to the audience. I do suspect this won't be the last we see of you on Late Night Snacks. And
I don't think so.
don't worry, we're roping you into more. But yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks for hopping on. Hope everyone can give Mark a warm welcome when they interact with him on calls or emails. And yeah, it was a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys for the time, and I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more all things F&B.
Welcome to the team, Mark.
Welcome to the team.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Cheers. All right. Well, to that note, cheers, Jeff, and to another successful episode of Late Night Snacks.
Cheers.